as an illustrator, you're a problem solver, right? You are there to visually problem solve whatever is brought to you. And in order to do that, you have to have a vision and you have to have abilities, but you also have to please and you have to really work with people.
Welcome to the Origins of Creativity podcast, brought to you by Bluesky Media, where we discover the magic behind creativity through the stories of passionate creators. Listen in and fill your creative vessel with delightful insights and uplifting tales. Hello, you are listening to the Origins of Creativity podcast. I'm your host, Becky Gehrisch. Thanks for joining us. On this episode, we're diving into the world of 3D illustration and stop-motion animation with an artist whose creative journey spans film, publishing, and beyond. I'm excited to explore the stories and process behind his work. Our guest today creates 3D illustrations and stop-motion animations. His work has been recognized by American Illustration, Communication Arts, and HOW. Additionally, he was awarded 3 gold and silver medals for both illustrated and motion work. The stop-motion animated films have screened at various festivals, including Los Angeles International Short Film Festival and Montreal Stop-Motion Film Festival. What's more, he has authored and illustrated the picture book, including Build, along with the lookbook. He has also illustrated the children's books Here Comes the Garbage Barge, The Beginner's Guide to Running Away from Home, The Secret Subway, and Elvis is King. Welcome to the show, Chris Sickles.
Thanks, Becky. It's nice to be here.
I am so excited to have you on. And ever since I saw your work on social media, I have been just kind of captivated by your style and what you do. So before we begin, since this is an audio podcast, I want to try to describe what your work is and what it looks like beyond just your bio description of 3D animation and illustration. So could you help our listeners envision what your work is?
Well, it's dimensional work. So it's 3D, but it's 3D as in hand-built 3D. So I guess you could kind of think of it as dioramas that are created and then photographed, and those photographs are the illustrations or the frames for the animation. So everything's just sort of built from scratch and lit, much like a photographer would light a scene or a set or a stage. And then it's sort of, that's how I render the work, I suppose. But as an illustrator, I work with sketches and brainstorming and thumbnails just like everybody else. But it's sort of the dimensional aspect of the rendering is what sets it apart, I suppose.
Right. So you find objects to create pieces and sets, right, to then photograph and put in books, and or they could be their own standalone piece, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So things are sculpted or manipulated. There's also found objects and textures and fabrics, and so all those elements sort of play into the life of the piece. Yeah.
Right. And so your figures, that your characters, how are those sculpted? Are they from found objects themselves, or do you sculpt those out of a different material for the face and the head and the parts of the body?
Yeah. So they're sculpted much like a basic sort of stop motion puppet would be built. So they have a wire armature, so they are posable. And then I use foam to kind of build up the form of the body. So you have flexibility, but still it's relatively light. And then I sculpt the heads out of a polymer clay. There's Sculpey, there's Cause clay. There's all different types of polymer clays. But it's a low temperature clay you can bake in an oven. And it's easy to do, so subtractive or additive sculpture. You can carve it and sand it after it's baked and paint it. So it's a relatively quick and easy material that allows me to work on deadlines with relative, not ease, but relative ability to kind of meet those deadlines,
Oh, I love it. Okay, so it's a lot of different pieces that go together to create whatever you're working on. So it's not necessarily, what people might imagine as, an illustrator would do with either the computer or paint or something like that. It's like a movie set, the stop motion aspect to it. So, how did you decide or come upon this style to then create both, standalone pieces and books and stop motion? What kind of got you to this point?
I knew, I guess it started in probably, when my youth, I just loved to draw and loved to create. I had an art teacher in high school, Mrs. Martin. She was the first person that really kind of told me my drawings could take me places. Because where I grew up in central Indiana, people didn't go off and become illustrators or artists. And I honestly didn't even know what an illustrator was until college, really. And then in college, I really studied painting and drawing. I mean, that's really what I was focused on. I wasn't into sculpture, really. I mean, I loved everything in foundations as far as sculpture and problem solving. And I think later in school, I was exposed to a couple puppet performances, sort of live marionette shows, and some stop motion films were coming out. So there was this whole sort of excitement around these dimensional worlds that made me feel like my paintings were two-dimensional, and I felt like there was another way to kind of explore the characters. And the puppets didn't really come until probably a few years out of school, just sort of exploring on my own and trying to figure out how that world could live as in the illustration industry. Because there were some dimensional illustrators at the time, and there still are. And there was a big wave of them in the 60s and 70s that were doing amazing work. So it's always been around. It was just sort of trying to figure out how to combine my love for, fabricating these characters and my love for problem solving in illustration, and how do you kind of combine those things. So it was sort of a long process of trying to figure out where it would fit.
There's like picture books from the time period that I remember seeing that were very captivating in the same way that yours are capturing a scene that was created physically in a photograph. When you were younger, do you remember any of those?
I don't really know that I came across it much in picture books. It was more in, like the Christmas special animations by Rankin Bass. I think those, I was just fascinated by that.
Yeah, I remember a few picture books when you said that, and it just kind of came into my brain again from that same time period. And they were really, really cool. It's the same kind of feel that your work has because of the lighting and just this magical part of seeing something that's real, but a new thing came from it. The sculpture of the piece or the characters and the set behind them. And it's just a really unique art form.
It can be scary too to kids sometimes. I mean, sometimes when you see, there are some picture books, and I can't think of the names of them now, but they were sort of, using like child's dolls posed in scenes. And it takes a weird connotation. And it's not really, because people talk about in character design, there's an uncanny valley where if something is sort of realism, but not realism, it falls into this groove where it just doesn't relate. People can't relate to it. So I've always tried to push the work to where it's fictional enough and sort of, I guess my word is wonky, so that it can live in its own world and it doesn't really have to fit in with our world.
Right. The stylized kind of image or the character has its own unique look. I can see that being different than just putting like a doll in the image because it is that would be too real. And yours is, like its own thing, its own world. And it becomes believable in that world that you created.
Yeah, exactly.
In my mind, I'm just imagining some of your pieces and your books. And in your picture book, the lookbook, it kind of has a bit of that almost kind of eerie feeling, but not creepy doll feeling. It has a really cool effect with the lighting, but the characters are going back and forth. They saw a car get towed, and the other one says, I saw a car get a towed.
Yeah, so it's a story about a twin brother and sister that basically they're bored, so their mother kicks them out of the house and tells them to go explore, and they see the same thing. It's a book on idiom, so they see the same thing, but they each see it individually. So one sees a dog throw a ball, and another one sees a dog throw a ball up. It's so it gets kind of it's. I guess it's a little eerie in that regards, and it's yeah.
Was it handwritten script that you did in there, or is this, a
Yeah.
font? Okay, yeah. So it's like kind of script, and it's kind of obviously handwritten, but it's just really cool. It's just certain things that you wouldn't expect to see, necessarily in a picture book, like this juxtaposition of like what somebody sees normally and what somebody sees kind of creepily. So
Yeah, for sure. I guess some people took offense to that, but for me, I mean, a lot of it related to my childhood and my sense of humor. So I mean, it's
yeah, I think there's room for all of that, and I could see where, certain children might be, "Oh, no, what is this?" But
oh, definitely.
it's different, and I think that's why it's great. Your work is your own. Obviously, it is not contrived. You have put so much thought into every piece of it because you're building it all. So if anybody hasn't looked at that or checked it out, you can look at the Red Nose Studio, which is Chris's website, and take a look at it.
Oh, I appreciate that, and I don't know that book could exist now. Like, I don't know that anybody would want to like take a chance with a book like that in with the way things are framed in now. So, I was fortunate enough to be able to do it. I was probably too young to understand sort of the big picture of everything. But no, I was it's still one of the projects I'm really, really proud of for sure. So I appreciate you talking about it.
Right. And, among all the other ones that you've worked on, I was just thinking about Build. You wrote and illustrated that one. It's construction equipment and trucks. And you built all of these pieces. They weren't, toys that you then photographed. You built all the pieces, right?
Yeah, and that's sort of was the impetus for that project was that I really wanted a book that not only focused on hands-on play, but also let the kids see that these were handmade and they weren't because when I did my initial research and looked at construction books, you either saw books that were just photographs because the machines are awesome. Like you really don't have to characterize them because they're already amazing feats of engineering. And then on the other end of the spectrum is like really graphic, sort of almost like dumbed down versions of the machines. And I never saw anything in the middle that was sort of like a fun type of rendering of it. So that was sort of how I kind of pitched the book was that it was just as, the way the things were constructed were just as important as the story itself and letting kids know that these things were all, made by hand and made with sandpaper and cutting wood and using little pieces of junk found objects. And so just kind of allowing kids to see that things can be open. And like I did one little book event with it and these kids came and I did a little drawing demo, but I could see that they were bored. I was talking about drawing with shapes and how you can create a machine out of a shape. So I just took the crayons and dumped them on the floor and said, let's all draw together. And they were like, you mean we can draw anything we want? And I was like, yeah, like we don't have to draw machines. I was like, no, let's just draw. So to see to give a kid permission to play was really cool. And my kids are older now, so I was a little distant from that. So it was a really cool little moment for sure.
Yeah, I love that because it gives their parents and them a chance to kind of see where they go with things. If it has to do with construction, equipment or their own kind of thought on anything and just see where it goes. And one of the spreads in this book is just so, I mean, they're really, really cool. But just the scene that I'm looking at it is a spread of a digger and it's digging down and the word says dig below, like in the space where it's digging. But all of the layers of earth and ground are pieces of cardboard. You can see the corrugation on the edges. And it's just a different way for kids to see how to create something else that already exists. So I it's just something that, they'll keep in their brain. It's something that I feel like I could have seen growing up and just really been, inspired by to think, oh, how could I make a tree look different than people typically make a tree? And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that.
So where did you get your degree, your art degree then?
I went to the Art Academy of Cincinnati.
Really? Oh, cool. So when you went into that, did you know exactly where you were kind of going to go with this? Or after seeing, like you said, the different examples, where were you going to start, I guess? And where were you, obviously where you ended up, but what were you thinking when you went there? Like, what was your goal if you had one?
I mean, my goal was just to draw. And my biggest fear was that I came from a school of like 40 kids in my graduating high school class. So I was like, Cincinnati was like the big city and it was just scary. And I was for sure that everybody there was going to just draw so much better than me. And that was my biggest fear, was like, how could I, having no confidence, but when I got there, the teachers were great. I found some other students that were just as passionate as I was. But I went to school thinking that you either did fine art paintings that hung over somebody's couch, or you designed shampoo bottles for Procter and Gamble. I didn't realize like there was a whole spectrum of things in the middle, let alone what illustration was. And nothing against Mrs. Martin and my high school teacher, because she just really focused on foundations and perspective and all the things that the first year of college is just hammers. So she really prepared me well for that. But it wasn't until probably my second year when another student, Sean Wallace, he was an older student. He took me to a local newsstand and flipped open Rolling Stone and was like, "This is what illustration is." And I remember seeing Chris Payne's piece. It was like The Birth of Gene Simmons, and that was like the first time it clicked. Like, illustration is art, but you're getting paid before you make something, and it's a collaboration. And it was really like, okay, because for me, art as a job was a hard concept. So that was sort of a way to like, okay, this could be, this is sort of the form and function of art that could really work and possibly be a career, and until that conversation with Sean, I really was sort of just trying to be a good drawer, and I didn't really have any other objectives beyond that. So that was again, one of those pivotal little conversations you have on a whim that can really sort of put a shift in your trajectory.
Right. And every little piece of that then comes into play to where you are today and what you're doing. And so when you were little, what did you want to do when you grew up?
I wanted to be an astronaut, of course. I grew up on a small family farm, so I just knew, I don't know if I really knew anything. I knew the family farm was getting smaller. Like as I got older, I saw that really wasn't going to be an option. I saw how my father struggled, and he was very supportive, my mother and father both, as far as me getting out and trying something different. And I think my father, he was sort of like raised with, you're going to take this over and do this, and this is what you're going to do. So I was grateful that he sort of gave me the leeway to try something different, even going to art school. I mean, my parents probably thought I had two heads when I told them I wanted to go to art school. So
That's fabulous. I mean, that's kind of how, I think everybody who chooses a career in, art, creativity, or anything like that, you kind of have to have this support from, your family and friends to kind of get into it and to stick with it. I can't imagine trying to do that without the support and pushing through all of that as well. And I can see just this wonder in your work. And I think that just seeing, I can just imagine, I guess, how you were maybe as a kid, just this, experimenting with ideas and playing with things. And I just think it's fun to imagine, kind of how you were. And
I was mostly a troublemaker, but
oh
yeah,
no,
but no, I had good intentions. Yeah.
honestly, I can see that. I love it. Yeah, yeah. It's just there's something behind it that it's just intriguing. When you started playing with stop motion, was that something that you did outside of, graduating, or was that part of
Oh
your
no,
schooling?
it was really kind of right when I was finishing school. I was just trying to figure out like what stop motion is essentially. And it was basically talking to older students we sort of had an animation program, but I really wasn't part of it. And they were the guys that had like a 16 millimeter camera or a Super 8 millimeter camera that their uncle gave them when they were kids. So I would try to glean any information from them on how you record these frames and it makes motion. It was a really foreign concept. And then you find a camera at a pawn shop and you hope that the guy at the pawn shop could tell you how to operate it. And you try to find a local place to buy film. And so it was this really sort of weird experiment of just like, how can you try it? Because it was almost a lost art so this was like the middle 90s, right?
Right. But yeah, it was something that they did when we were kids and then kind of let that go for other styles of animation.
Right. Yeah. So this was about the time like the Wallace and Gromit, the first Wallace and Gromit short came out, and Nightmare Before Christmas had come out. And then I had learned about, like at the art house films, you saw the Quay brothers and you saw the Lorenstein brothers. And you just saw all this amazing stop motion that was, not all of it was really commercial. Some of it was very sort of art house stuff. And there were all these textures and emotions and things that just got me super excited. So I literally found a really cheap Super 8 camera and set it up in a spare bathroom and just started trying to move puppets, and things would fall over and the film would look terrible, but I was excited about it, So I guess that's how I was sort of self-taught with animation. And that was before, there was no YouTube, there were no, you just tried it. And when you messed up, you tried again. And that was, I got hooked on it then,
What was it? What was the thing that kind of made you keep going with it? Was it visually just the challenge?
I think visually I loved it, but I also knew that like when they did film products or productions, then they would sort of assemble a team. They would create a film in a couple years, and then the film would come out and the team would disperse. And that's how animation sort of worked. There wasn't Leica wasn't around yet, and Aardman was in the UK. So there really wasn't a place for me to go as a stop. And I was really self-taught. So that's what sort of maybe sort of shift gears and try to figure out, how do I take what I love about fabrication and lighting and textures and what I loved about illustration and see if I could fold those two things together. And then that's sort of how the three-dimensional work evolved.
And you can see it. If people, jump on the Red Nose Studio again, just looking at just a still of an animation, you can see the lighting and the color and everything, just the shadows and lighting just in a still of it. Just this careful placement of everything. You can see the compilation of just all of it. Like, it just seems like a whole world was put into, like your whole brain was put into this piece to create it. And I love it. And so you've mentioned a bunch of artists. Were there any that kind of stood out to you as, a hero after the fact, or someone to really look up to as you continued to learn and fine tune your process?
I think one artist that really made an impact, his name is Tim Hawkinson, and he's a contemporary artist. And I don't even know how to begin to explain his work, but I used to work at the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati. I was an art handler, and basically you're the person that unpacks art and helps install art and fix walls and paint walls. But Tim Hawkinson he's an installation artist. So when his work came, he was there for a couple weeks, sort of assembling everything, and we all got to work side by side with him. And he was, for one, his work was amazing. It's just this tremendous scale and texture, and just the way he uses objects and materials. But then he was just a super nice guy, super hardworking, but also very approachable and honest. And he didn't, like, a lot of times when an artist comes in, the art handlers are just sort of the slaves, right?
Right.
But he wasn't like that. He was like, look how I made this, and this thing's not working, so I need to change this and tweak this. And we've all got to like hang over his shoulder and watch him do this. And he was very open and enthusiastic about his work. He was excited. And I can remember he even was going in to repair something, and the curator was like, because it's owned by somebody, you're not allowed to repair it. Like, we have to have an insurance company. So he was like, because it's his work, and he's just trying to make it work.
That's so cool.
So that was a huge, not necessarily nothing to do with animation. I guess more sculpture and emotion and atmosphere, I guess. But that was a big one. And I think part of it was just because he was such a nice artist to work with, and I think that sticks with me too. I try to just be nice in my work and humble and try to always let the work be at the forefront.
Right. And I can see why people would want to then work with you more to, have a good relationship with somebody who's pleasant to work with and loves what they're doing. And
Yeah, and as an illustrator, you're a problem solver, right? You are there to visually problem solve whatever is brought to you, and in order to do that, you have to have a vision, and you have to have abilities, but you also have to please, and you have to really work with people. And I think I also really like that aspects. I am a pleaser, I suppose. Yeah.
I can understand that. And you're wanting it to look right for them, their vision, and make it the best that you can make it for them and you, and make everybody happy. And when you're illustrating a picture book for someone, how is that different for you than when you were writing and illustrating on your own?
Um. Well, as an illustrator, you really when the manuscript's written by an author, there's not a lot of, at least in my experience, is very narrow because I've only done a handful of books, but very rarely is the author and the illustrator in communication. Maybe if there's a couple questions on clarity with characters or something, but the editors really seem to be adamant about letting the writer do what they do, and then letting the illustrator do what they do, and allow those two skills create the book, as opposed to one skill sort of following the lead of the other. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think having editors like that was really a good experience for me.
So you had the freedom to interpret the text the way you felt it should go with the guidance of the editor. And
Oh no, definitely with the guidance of the editor. Yeah, there were plenty of revisions, and
yeah, then the writer could, surprise, there's this amazing thing that they couldn't even imagine to do because they're the writer. And it's really kind of fun to see that happen. And then when you're doing your own, since it's in your head, the story and the manuscript itself, is that easier or harder for you in your mind?
That's a great question. Probably just as hard, or not. It may be even harder because you kind of, you feel like if it all goes south, it's all your fault. So there's almost a little bit more pressure. So you really try to for me, I just tried to keep each stage as broken into small chunks as possible, so I could sort of not get overwhelmed with it, and sort of just kind of, again, just keep the story at the forefront, and not get too wrapped up in details that maybe would bog it down.
Right. And it all pays off. It sounds like, you've received some very high praise with New York Times Best Illustrated Book of 2010 for the Here Comes the Garbage Barge, which, it's amazing. And then you received the Huffington Post Best Picture Book of the Year and the School Library Journal Best Book of the Year. How have those experiences and other recognition kind of moments been for you?
Um, I mean, it's all good. But I think for me, the real important part is, when you get a note from a parent or a teacher or a kid, even. I think those are the ones that really stick. I mean, I think when the Garbage Barge got recognition, I was still pretty. That was really my first official children's book, so I had no idea what it meant. I didn't know what the school library journal, or I don't even know how you say it. I didn't even know what weight that had. I was totally unaware of it, and I think my agent at the time didn't even really realize that either. And so I just really just kept working.
Moved along, right?
Yeah, just kept on working. So
I think that's a good way to kind of go about it. You're just doing your thing. You're staying true to your quality and your style and your work, and let the chips fall as they may when it comes to what you receive and what you don't, because you don't have control over that.
No, definitely not. But I do realize that in the book realm, in the book market, that those things do carry a lot of weight, because that affects sales, and that I mean, I think those are very important. But usually that all happens after you've done everything you could do to it, right? It's already imprinted and it's gone, and there's nothing you can change or.
You're working on the next thing maybe at that point.
Yeah, that's the thing is that I think as a young student, I always felt like this whatever I was working on was going to be what was going to do it, like make it work. And I think that was an okay attitude to have. But as I've gotten older, I realized that everything is just a step towards the next. Like I don't think there's ever anything that is going to like do it. And that's okay because I really like the making of it. I didn't get in this to like make some stuff and then be like, oh, okay, I'm done. I want to keep seeing what's next. And whenever people ask like, what's your favorite project? I was like, I hope it's the one I do tomorrow, that kind of thing, so just trying to keep forward on it.
Oh, I love that. The soul of the creator, I think, is trying something new, experimenting with the next thing, tweaking something that you wanted to tweak and just seeing what happens, what's in front of you that you created. And that, like you said, with kids or anybody who's appreciating your art, to have that feedback from people who honestly love it and want to tell you that, for no other reason than to share that with you.
Yeah, no, definitely. Definitely.
When you're creating these scenes, how big are some of these backgrounds and the scale of things for you?
Yeah, sure. No, that's a great question. Most of the figures are probably like 7 to 9 inches tall. So the worlds sort of revolve around that. Most of the tables that I shoot on are basically a 4 foot by 4 foot square. So just sort of a general tabletop size. So that's generally the scale, basically because of my small studio. That's kind of what I can maneuver lights around. Obviously the space that you work in is very physical, so everything sort of has to fit within the realms of my little garage, essentially.
I mean, how does your garage look with all the pieces and parts for the find objects that you use? I mean, are there just drawers and shelves of parts and found objects?
Lots of drawers, right? Lots of drawers. I'm not a hoarder, but I'm probably close. And yeah, you're always tripping over cords and light stands. But that's okay. It keeps it focused and it keeps everything at hand. Like I don't have to go very far to do what I need to do. So.
And when you're working, if let's say you're working on just setting up you've already made the pieces and you're setting them up to then photograph, is that a whole different mindset for the photography parts or the rendering of what you're setting up compared to making the pieces?
A lot of times as I build and fabricate, I have the camera at least some rough lights up because that way you can kind of keep referencing through the lens of the camera and make sure that everything is scaled properly, and that, if you're building structures or buildings like facades, if you need to have them recede, then there's certain, the ones in the back are shorter and shorter and shorter, and you really only have to build one side if it's going to be photographed in a certain way. So it's much like I guess like a theater set is, that it's everything's really built to that camera eye, and the camera eye is basically capturing what the thumbnail or the sketch is, right? The composition of the sketch. So you're constantly referencing that, because otherwise I find that if I don't do that, then I get lost in all the details and you end up sculpting things that don't need to be sculpted or rendering what doesn't need to be rendered. So you have to really kind of keep it very
back and forth.
Yeah, very back and forth.
And I love how it's like everything is some other kind of art form. It's sculpture, it's illustration, it's theater, it's set design, it's, animation, and it's movie in its own thing. I mean, it's just so cool.
Yeah, no, it keeps me going. I'm not just sitting still and rendering on a painting, which that was always hard for me as a painter, that I just felt a little hamstrung and probably limited by my skills as well. So, I don't know that I knew at the time, but it seems like this really utilizes everything I'm really excited about with art making, with making in general and problem solving. So I like that part of it.
And when you're doing different expressions, I don't think many people often think about it, but you're doing different heads for each face often. Is that correct?
Yeah. So yeah, generally if once you have your dummy approved, or at least mostly approved, and the dummy is sort of your picture book's all drawn out, right? All the pages are drawn out, and I'll find those range of expressions in the dummy, and then say, okay, I'm going to need 7 heads of this character in order to
Oh, wow.
create this, or or the like. So, and then those just pop on and off the character. So it's a little more work at the beginning. It's a little more production heavy at the beginning, but once you get into photography and certain assets are built, then it does actually pick up steam towards the latter half of the book.
Okay, so getting into the weeds a little bit here. When you're making them, do you ever find, you're frustrated there, the hair isn't right on this guy, the same, head as the next expression, or you never use that face after all? I mean, is there anything like that that
Oh no,
happens?
that definitely happens quite
Okay.
often. And even like with build, when we had everything designed and sketched, and when we got to the shots with the kid, when I sculpted the kid, I didn't see it, but the editor saw that he matched the sketch, but he looked too old. Like he just didn't look. So there was this huge sort of like, how did I miss that sort of thing? So it was an interesting problem, because we were deciding like, okay, well, how old should this kid be? And then you got into, like a kid that's 5, his arms are proportionally this to his body and his ears. And we were getting into all these conversations, and I'm like, no, this is not how I can't do that. Like some illustrators can do that. They can pivot on a dime. And I was getting into these drawings and these revisions that were falling into that uncanny valley that I mentioned earlier, where the kid was he was getting too real and too weird. And so I basically just had to tell the editors, I'm like, I want to try something different. And I went back to my original sketches, which usually are just piles. And I just sorted through all the kids and eventually found this little thumbnail of a kid that was like, wasn't even a postage stamp size. And I was like, and he was all wrong. His legs were too short and his body was too thin and his arms were too long and his ears were too big, but he was like, he had a character. And I was like, I think this is the kid. And because the sketch worked, then it worked. But it wasn't a kid that looked right. It looked right, but it wasn't right. I don't know.
No, I'm actually looking at that right now, and I found it, and I think it is so cool because you're sticking with, it's like what feels right with the rest of everything, and your style, and your approach to everything. And he doesn't look out of place. He looks like he fits there. It's just this, the right kind of kid for this world of the construction pieces. And I'm so glad. I don't know what the other one looked like, but it doesn't. He
Oh,
doesn't.
it was terrible.
It's interesting to hear, though, how going back and forth and trying to imagine, we see things at the end of the day that are finished and complete, and we don't imagine all of the changes and adjustments and conversations that are had
Yeah.
behind the
No,
scenes.
definitely. And I've been doing this when I did that book, it was 28 years, 25 years. I don't know, but I should have had all that figured out by then. I shouldn't have to like hit hurdles like that. But I think that's just what art is. I mean, it is.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so much involved with your pieces. There's just this tower, this whole structure next to this boy that he's built, and you're, I'm imagining, are you like thinking of all the placement of the parts and the colors and the lighting, and with everything, you might not see something that somebody else
Oh no,
would,
for
right?
sure. Yeah, definitely. And like for that book, we knew the kid there was going to be something being built, but we didn't know, like, it was going to be just as wonky as the machines, right? So you kind of had to like, okay, I'll take all these shapes and build this thing, and then sort of deconstruct it and know that this is how it'll be built. So it was a fun little process there too, where you got to kind of just play with like what works best for the space and the environment, and then sort of work backwards and try to sequentially figure out what is the best way to build this thing, and make it sort of a slow reveal for the reader. So, and it's really like only 13 or 15 words. So there's nothing, I mean, I've seen kids read it really quick and then they're off to something else. So it's definitely not something you have to ponder, but if the kids want to spend some time looking, they definitely get to see some stuff for sure.
And I think, yeah, there's different uses for different books, and this one, with like just the visuals, just for art. I mean, I could see art teachers or kids who are just into building and anybody who's into this art style, this art technique to just sit there and study it. It's just a book you could just look at forever. And then just to kind of pivot a little bit, speaking of characters, you also do commissioned pieces of characters. How has that been for you? Do people then give you an idea like, I would like you to, do an image of my grandma, and you just kind of come up with that? How does that work?
Um, well, it's something that I haven't done a whole lot of, but I've been doing, I guess, more recently because I don't know, the sculptures have definitely taken on a different life than they had in the past. So it just starts with a conversation, and sometimes people are looking for something that's more caricature or likeness, and that's where I just kind of say that's not really what I'm good at. I think it would again fall into uncanny valley kind of thing. So I just try to have a conversation with people and find out what they're looking for, and if it really aligns with kind of what I do. And when it does, it's really fun. It's a neat experience for them, but for me as well. But it's a lot like I do with any other work. I still do have the conversation is kind of the creative brief that you would have in a commercial project, and then I share sketches and thumbnails and sort of initial approach, and usually there's a conversation about what resonates with them, and there's another round and kind of refining, and then I sculpt. So it's it's I keep it very similar to how I work any other way. Yes, really. Yeah.
And are there any sculptures or pieces that you were like, yes, absolutely, I have to do this. I love this. And this is like your favorite one that you've ever worked on? Or have they all just kind of been, just little parts of you that just evolve?
Yeah, they just evolve, and like I recently did one kind of a tribute to a Greek grandmother, and so it really wasn't anybody in specifically, but it was more about how do you capture that attitude. And so I learned a lot about traditions and cooking and um, sort of this broad sort of um, I don't know. I have no Greek roots at all, so it was all fascinating to me. So that was something where I learned just as much on that as I would at any other sort of project. So
You find creativity is like that, where learning is a big part of the excitement?
yeah, because I think a lot of that learning is part of the research, and you really get to dig into things, and you get to dig into. I mean, I was even digging into like architecture and what other sort of facets could I fold into this, and yeah, no, I think I just I really enjoy that part of it, especially with picture books. You really get to dig in for a long time and really build, a world that's much more expansive than a single image. And yeah, I don't know, it just has a deeper dive, I guess, for me.
Right. And for the viewer, half the time we see the end product again. And, I'm not thinking about how your thought process was all the time. I'm thinking, oh, look at this, this Greek grandmother type person. And I'm not thinking, oh, all the things you had to learn to go into that, like the clothing and the way she stands or what she's cooking, and I think that's what's great about art is taking that moment and pausing and really thinking about what you were thinking about and what the piece is as itself. And just, it gives us this moment to not speed through life.
Yeah, and that's a really tough thing. I think like I just took my daughter to the art museum today, and we don't get to go very often, but it was kind of nice to just stand in front of a painting for a while, and you didn't hear anything, nothing was moving. You could just live there for a minute and be transported. And I think that's a really almost sort of a thing people lose a little bit nowadays sometimes. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And then your pieces have been used. I saw they were used in billboards, CD covers, and magazines, and of course, theater visuals. Like, was there anything that you've seen your pieces in that were a surprise to you? That wow, that's actually on a CD cover, kind of thing.
I think it's always cool to see the work in context. Whether it's a small little magazine or whether it's more of a larger advertising project. But it's always neat to see it in context and know that hopefully it successfully works as a whole with everything else. Even the book cover, those there's so much that goes into those with placement and color and choices of lettering and design. So working so closely with a cover designer and seeing what they can do with the work. Sometimes the work I give them seems like there's no room to wiggle, and they can make things sing, and the work just travels to another dimension beyond what I just did. So it's neat to see that everybody contributes in it, and it goes further than any one of us could have done by ourselves, kind of thing.
Right, right. Your Elvis is King book, there's a glowing neon sign, lit up saying Elvis behind the top half of your sculpture of Elvis. It's just so cool to see the composition and how it was all worked out to kind of become this cover that not necessarily a traditional
No, that was a tough sell.
idea. I love it. I
That
love it.
was a tough sell.
Oh, was that yours or was that theirs? Because I think it's so cool.
I just kept, we did all these sketches and I kept going back to this hair and really just focusing on, because when he changes his hair, he really makes a choice to be somebody else, and like be himself and try to be what he wanted. And he got laughed at for the clothes that he wore and the way he did his hair when he was a kid. And I think that it was a neat message. And so that's just what resonated with me. So I'm really happy with that cover, but yeah, who knows?
No, I was just admiring
I'm
it. So
glad
I
you picked
think,
it out.
yeah, that's really fun. So I don't know if you're allowed to share what you're working on now, but if you are, I'd love to share it with our listeners.
Well, right now, I mean, it's just one of those times where it's a little slow right now. So I've had um, a couple weeks to work on some sculptures that I've been wanting to work on, and then this last week and a half, I've worked on an animation that I'd always wanted to try, and it's a real simple animation, very sort of a little more abstract, but it just gives me a chance to experiment and keep playing, because if I'm not doing that, then I freak out because the phone's not ringing. Their jobs aren't coming in. So I really have to kind of continue to, I guess, sort of trick myself to thinking that I'm working even when I'm not.
Right, sticking with the pattern and just continuing to produce.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
that work builds, and it right now it seems like I'm sort of futilely working on something that has no purpose, but I'm something is churning and growing there, and it's a freedom that I don't necessarily wouldn't get from somebody, on any commission sort of work. It's sort of like, okay, I'm going to push it and put it out there and see what happens, but and I've always done that, but I'm better at giving myself permission to do that now as I age in this career, I think. But it's like right now it's very, very quiet. So
Having I guess, the experience now, what advice would you give your young self looking back?
I think hmm, I don't know. I guess I would tell myself to always remember why I got in it. But that's something I would tell myself now, I suppose, or I tell myself every day now. It seems like, but I think just to stay curious and not to settle, to try new things and trust the process and see where it leads. I think that's a really hard thing, especially as a young student. You seem like you're geared to create a portfolio that's going to do it, like that's going to work. And I think the biggest thing for me when I got out was everybody told me I needed to replace all the student work in my portfolio because it looked like student work. Like you need to just keep pushing. You need to keep like that was a great start, but now what? What's next? And I think that was always really good advice to get.
Absolutely, and when you've been, making all these pieces and creating this body of work, what has been the most challenging?
Um, I don't know. The challenges always shift. I mean, every project has different challenges. I think the the biggest challenge for me is just to stay true to it and to not try to, because illustration is a very sort of not faddish, but it sort of has trends, right? It's very trendy. Illustration can have very trendy things happening, and I think there's been times when I felt like, oh, I think my work maybe is outside of that trend, and it's okay. I think as long as I focus on the problem solving and the storytelling in the work, that it will continue. But that's just sort of my, again, sort of naive approach of just sticking to it and maybe being a little stubborn and thinking I can get through this, because I've been through some really rough times and challenging times, and the work's been up and down, and but I always feel like trusting the work is where it's the most important. And my wife always tells me to stop doubting. Like, she literally wrote it on a piece of paper and it hangs over here up on my wall. Because I just, when things get challenging, sometimes it's hard to keep your confidence up, and I think that's always tough, for sure.
Yes. And I think that's great advice in itself, for others to hear who, are starting out, or, hoping this, what they're working on will become a career, that there's always going to be challenges and uncertainty, especially with art and creativity, and that to have reminders for ourselves that it's not always just you get to this point and it's easy going,
Yeah, no, for sure.
There's always something that will, keep you on your toes, especially with creativity. It's such a, vulnerable
Yeah.
career
Yes.
path to put yourself out there in your style. Yeah.
And I think that, that vulnerable conversation comes up a lot, in that, it seems like there's a lot of challenges for artists now. And I mean, there always have been, but I can't imagine being a student right now and having all the AI dialogue swirling around you when you're trying to find out who you are, and people are telling you that you should be this. I think that's the hardest thing to hear as a student, or as just anybody that's starting
Competing
to
with that
grow.
almost.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, and it's
right?
starting to grow. And I don't know, I was just imagining myself if I was their age at this point, just completely shutting off any kind of visual, social media, internet, like just completely going into some cave somewhere and just ignoring it all, just so I could try to stay true to, my own vision, I guess. That would be really
No,
hard. Yeah.
definitely. I do that. I do that quite often, where you just have to just shut stuff off and just really try to focus on the work, and because I'm not there are some illustrators that are very, very political and very outspoken, and that really is what drives their work. But I don't really, I guess I don't get excited engaging that way. For me, it's more, I guess it's more of a subtle message maybe in the work. But
You create a different world that's not our world, I think, as well. It's a mirror of it in a way, but it's it's a different style. So it almost feels like it's not the same. It's a different time, it's a different place. So to end our conversation today, what has been the most rewarding for you on this journey?
oh gosh, I think really I get to make, that I get to do this stuff, that I get to build, I get to create. I think that really is the reward that I enjoy. I think it's a privilege. It's an honor to get to do it. I don't have any other skills, so I don't have any other choices. So it's what I'm lucky to do. Yeah, I think that's that. Yeah.
I think, that definitely can resonate with, I think, most every creative out there. We're doing this because we have to. We, enjoy it, and we get to. One more thing I'd like for you to share with us. Where can people find you online?
Well, there's the website, rednosestudio.com, and then all my social media handles are at rednosestudio. I'm on Bluesky and Instagram, and I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook a little bit too, but mostly Instagram for sure.
Wonderful. I will put those in the show notes. And I wanted to thank you so much for coming on with me to discuss all of the ins and outs of stop motion and the creations that you create. I appreciate you coming on.
No, Becky, I really appreciate the conversation, and I hope some of those things we touched on resonate with others, no matter what they create or what they make. And yeah, I just really appreciate you taking the time to dig into the work a little bit. I'm honored.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I want to thank our listeners for joining us today. If you found this podcast valuable, please share it with others so we can reach people who might like a bit of inspiration on their own creative journey. I'm Becky Gehrisch, and until next time, happy creating. Hey there, creative minds. Are you ready for the next burst of inspiration? Make sure to subscribe to the Origins of Creativity podcast in your favorite podcast app for all our latest episodes. Visit booklinkmedia.com/podcast for show details, links to connect with us, and so much more. This has been the Origins of Creativity podcast, where inspiration meets imagination.